Merci d'être ici avec nous ce soir pour cette 3e édition des Réalités de la science-fiction. Juste, sachez que c'est un événement qui, comme toujours, est bilingue à l'UMA, donc vous avez une traduction. Just know that if you need some headphones, you can get them over there for the translation during all of the event. Donc on est vraiment ravis d'ouvrir cette 3e édition des Réalités de la science-fiction. Je crois que tout est dit dans le titre, c'est-à-dire qu'à travers ce programme, on va regarder comment, non pas la science-fiction nous emmène vers simplement des horizons fantastiques et déconnectés de toute réalité, mais au contraire, comment est-ce qu'ils nous permettent de mieux nous plonger à l'intérieur de ce réel, et comment est-ce qu'ils nous permettent surtout de réfléchir à cela. Ça va passer ce week-end par une exploration de thématiques comme la science-fiction climatique, la cli-fi, ou encore on va continuer les explorations de l'afrofuturisme et d'autres formes d'imaginaire extrêmement variées qui nous permettent de réfléchir au monde dans lequel que l'on habite. Et juste comme petite note, c'était intéressant de se dire qu'on a commencé en 2020, qu'on finit en 2023, juste avant 2024, qui est l'année lors de laquelle le roman d'Octavia Butler, La parabole du semeur, commence, qui est l'un des livres les plus influents, je crois, dans le champ, en tout cas, de la science-fiction climatique. Elle décrit un monde qui est assez désenchanté, quand même, qui a été ravagé par le changement climatique, et une jeune femme hyper empathique essaye de créer une communauté, la communauté, donc, The Earthseed Community. Et donc, on verra bien quel type de communauté, quel type d'idées, quel type quel type de semences peuvent émerger à partir de ce symposium. Je vous remercie et je passe la parole à Flora.
Bonsoir. Donc pour commencer cette la lumière. Pour commencer cette session, on est un peu ému de commencer cette soirée par un entretien avec une des plus grandes figures de la science-fiction aujourd'hui, Samuel Delany, alias Chip, qui est une des plus grandes figures par la qualité de son œuvre, bien sûr, mais aussi parce qu'elle inspire les plus jeunes générations dans une littérature de science-fiction engagée, révélatrice des asymétries dans leurs aspects à la fois féministes, queer, racisés. Et en fait, d'abord, je souhaitais remercier 2 personnes qui ne sont pas là, mais qui sont vraiment à l'origine de cette invitation. Charlotte Wett et Clara Pacotte, qui sont 2 jeunes artistes qui avaient, lors de la première session de ce symposium, fait une série de lectures de science-fiction féministe et tout au long du week-end, et c'est elle qui, au cours d'une discussion, avait dit que une grande figure de la science-fiction qu'il faudrait inviter, avec qui il faudrait échanger et discuter aujourd'hui, c'est Samuel Delany, mais réputé vraiment injoignable, très difficile, et qui refusait notamment les entretiens aujourd'hui. Donc on a relevé le défi pour cette dernière session, et d'abord avec la précieuse aide de celle de Benjamin Thorel. Donc sans Benjamin, on n'aurait pas pu faire cet entretien. Donc Benjamin n'est pas seulement un des fondateurs de la librairie d'art contemporain la plus pointue de Paris, After Eight Books, mais il est également aussi un grand lecteur de science-fiction et un grand fan de Samuel Delany. Benjamin, je te remercie beaucoup d'avoir accepté de faire cet entretien de haut vol. Et donc, je te laisse la parole donc, pour présenter notre auteur, qui sera donc suivi d'un Q&A en live avec Samuel Delany. Merci Benjamin, et je te laisse la parole.
Merci Flora, et merci à LUMA pour cette invitation. Parce qu'effectivement, pour moi, c'était une forme de... Du coup, c'est à la fois un petit peu... c'est pas simple de présenter cette... Donc, j'ai fait une interview avec Samuel il y a quelques jours qu'on a monté pour ce qu'on va présenter là dans un premier temps ce soir. Donc, ce sera effectivement suivi ensuite. On se connectera avec lui sur Zoom pour discuter avec lui. Donc, l'entretien que j'ai réalisé, on a fait une sélection assez courte de propos. Donc, je suis sûr que vous aurez plein d'autres questions à lui poser, puisqu'effectivement, il y a quelques sujets qu'on a effleuré pendant notre entretien. Peut-être, bon, j'imagine que la plupart d'entre vous ici connaissent effectivement l'œuvre de Samuel Delany. Donc je ne vais pas me lancer dans de grande présentation, ce d'autant qu'elle est extraordinairement complexe et riche, puisque effectivement il a publié son premier roman à 19 ans à la fin des années, au milieu des années 60. Et il publie encore aujourd'hui régulièrement, ne serait-ce que sur Facebook, des posts assez toujours exceptionnels de qualité critique sur d'autres auteurs également. C'est quelqu'un effectivement qui a écrit la science-fiction, mais pas seulement, aussi énormément d'essais, de fiction dans d'autres domaines. Donc il y a pour le symposium une sélection de ces livres qui sont disponibles ici. Effectivement, en français, il y a relativement peu de choses qui sont traduites, même si on a eu la chance récemment d'avoir une réédition du roman Babel 17, avec lequel il avait reçu le prix Nebula, en 66, je crois. Et les éditions Goater ont édité un petit roman qui est assez curieux, qui est L'athée du grenier, qui est une rencontre entre Leibniz et Spinoza, si je ne dis pas de bêtises. Et en annexe à ce cours roman, ils ont fait une traduction d'un essai qui est assez important, qui s'intitule effectivement du racisme en science-fiction. Donc, qui est d'une part un texte très intéressant parce qu'il fait une généalogie des auteurs afro-américains en science-fiction, donc d'une certaine manière aussi en se mettant lui-même un peu sur le côté en disant voilà, non, je ne suis pas le premier auteur afro-américain, je ne suis pas le premier auteur afrofuturiste, et tout en du coup proposant une généalogie et en revenant aussi sur des questions de discrimination, d'inégalité qu'il a été aussi une des personnes à comment dirais-je, à remettre en cause ou à faire tomber par des textes effectivement engagés, mais dans lesquels il y a toujours une complexité assez extraordinaire dans la manière dont les personnages sont définis ou se définissent avec des identités mouvantes, qu'il s'agisse effectivement de race, de sexe, de genre. Et donc voilà, il y aurait beaucoup de choses à discuter avec Chip. Donc on va passer peut-être maintenant à la présentation, et puis la présentation donc, de cet entretien qui dure environ 18 minutes, et puis on se connectera ensuite avec lui. Voilà, merci.
I was thinking of quite a general question, which was like as simple as it is, like what makes for you the appeal and the value of science fiction. Well, today, but I was thinking that it maybe it makes sense to elaborate on what may have attracted you to science fiction, what drove you in that field when you started writing yourself as like, a teenager.
I'm not sure what the answer is. I know I enjoyed as a child. I enjoyed reading science fiction, but I enjoyed reading everything. I was particularly taken up with things that were difficult. But that's all I really can't say. I didn't think of myself as someone who's going to be a science fiction writer. I never decided that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a writer. My then wife, Marilyn Hacker, got a job at Ace Books, and she would complain all the time about the stuff she had to edit at Ace Books, and so I decided to write a story just for her. And now you have to understand, I had written, before I got started, I had written almost 10 non-science fiction novels, and we had, and we went over them together and what have you, and I think some of them got better and some of them were not terribly good, but I just assumed that that's what I was going to do. I was going to be a writer, and eventually the science fiction eventually sold. And so that's the only way, so books like The Jewels of Aptor, Empire Star, The Ballad of Beta 2, the trilogy of novels, The Fall of the Towers. They came together, and I was also working on it at the same time. I was working on a very big novel called Voyage Orestes, which had nothing to do with science fiction at all. You know, as I said, there was a science fiction club in the Bronx High School of Science where I went, and Marilyn and I went a couple of times. We were not, I don't think we ever joined it, but we liked it, and so that was. But there was a whole lot of other things going on as well, and I liked stories that were colorful, and I liked stories that were that had action, you know, that something happened, and that's how I started writing that. For a while, I decided I used to sing in the coffee shops in the Greenwich Village area at that point. And sometime there was the East Village and the West Village, and I remember at one point I said, "Well, what if I made more money at?" You know, and you just connect. And I realized that I had made more money at singing than I had, than I had at writing. And so I said, "Well, let's really work on the singing." There was a group of us called Heavenly Breakfast, and we got together and we worked very hard, and I was the arranger for the group, and we decided that's what we were going to do, and then it's a little difficult to explain how it all went south, but it did all go south, and the Con Edison Company changed its credit policy to small recording sessions. There were about 8 small recording sessions in New York, not sessions, recording studios in New York, and Con Edison suddenly decided to change its policy to them, and so we had made a date to do a recording at one of these
Studios.
Studios, yes, and we got there, and there were chains on the door, and they had decided they were not going to extend these places credit anymore, and so we just if we had gotten there maybe 2 days or 3 days before, we might have made our record. We might have made our record, and so that was it, you know, and so that was the end of the Heavenly Breakfast. We sort of, you know. We had worked very, very hard for a while, and during the time I was working on Heavenly Breakfast, I wasn't doing any writing. I wrote a few letters to people who wrote me letters. I answered a few letters, but that was it. And then suddenly all that was in the past, and I was, you know, and so I thought, well, maybe I will go and just spend my time doing one major novel, which in that, of course, was Dahlgren, and that was about 5 years. That was about 5 years worth of work, and I managed to keep body and soul together somehow, and then when I did it, much to the surprise of everybody, it was a great success.
I think I must have read somewhere that that there's maybe a notion of margin, how like science fiction could be considered a marginal genre literature, and how this notion may have like some interest for you with regard instead of being obsessed by the idea of writing at the center or being like immediately in some kind of a grand idea of literature, but thinking about the margin, working like how science fiction can be at the same time a marginal genre, but also a place from which it is possible to observe or like to talk about, to write about the margins, the actual margins of the society. I mean, is it something that makes sense also in this?
Well, I don't know. At the time, I mean, different people had different attitudes. Science fiction was considered silly kid stuff. It was, and I decided, well, what would happen if you made up something that was not silly kid stuff? If it was, and it managed to take off, and it's in that particular book was probably my most successful book, and it's still in print for years.
One specific question then would be like in Dahlgren, the chapter about the family of the Richards, which seems to be like this kind of like, which seems to represent some kind of an idea of normality. It's a white family that wants to continue living in a normal way in this like city when everything becomes like, so how, that would be a specific thing I'd like to hear.
Well, and the thing is, of course, the thing that makes the Richards abnormal is the fact that there is no normality around them, and they're just like holding on to it. And Mrs. Richards is a character whom I like very much. She's trying to be normal in a place where there is no normality, where money. Dahlgren is a novel where one way to look at it from the big thing is where money doesn't have any particular meaning anymore. People are not making change and what have you, and people are coming in, and in fact, we don't know how, everybody just seems to be getting by the best they can. And which is one of the reasons why it has to be a fantasy because of it, because otherwise the whole thing is sort of inside out.
What I think is interesting when you're mentioning this notion of difficulty is also how yourself in your essays or in texts you wrote about science fiction, you kind of made yourself also like an advocate of this, how science fiction could be or should be taken seriously. And I was really impressed how you also took to me, like when you decided to write a lengthy sentence by sentence essay about Thomas Disch, Angoulême, taking also yourself kind of the same role as like Roland Barthes did when he wrote like Cette.
Well, I very much enjoyed Barth's stuff, and I thought it would be interesting to try and do the same thing with a science fiction story, and so. And a very good science fiction writer, and I thought, was Tom Disch. So I used his Angoulême, one of his stories. He had a series of stories, of 6 stories, which was a story series, and I used one of them as my to give it a sort of sentence by sentence or phrase by phrase reading, and to see how it worked. And that was that was interesting because Disch himself was a rather difficult man, and he eventually killed himself which was sad. Again, you do these things, and people either like them or they don't like them, or they survive or they don't survive, and most of them are in print, are still in print, but that's about all I can say. Why is a mystery to me.
I was wondering if since like this title of this symposium, Realities of Science Fiction, I was wondering if like for you today there's like there's a specific echo for you with this term. Are there like some writers or like some science fiction you're particularly interested in today that to you makes it like...
The ones that interest me tend to be the ones that have always interested me. I still think Theodore Sturgeon, who died in 1985 in the last century, is still the best, is one of the best writers that... And then it's one of the best writers we ever produced. I only met him 4 or 5 times, but I'm trying to put together an anthology of some of his stories that are just selection here, that are chosen not because they were popular, but because I thought they were interesting. There's some things about it, the stories that were interesting. We will see how that comes along.
Would you say a few words about one of the stories you're particularly interested in putting in this anthology?
His very first story, which is called Heavy Insurance, which I think the first story that somebody publishes is always interesting. But just by, he's a writer, it's not a science fiction story particularly. But I think it's I think it's an interesting little story. And then he has other stories as well. And at one point, when he was 15, he went to Canada, and got in some trouble with his father. And he went to work for he began hanging around a little Canadian circus, and that became an important part of his first novel, which was called The Dreaming Jewels, which is about a kid who runs away and joins the circus and also changes sex while and becomes a girl for several years. And I think it's a wonderful novel. And he didn't like the novel because he had two villains in it, and he used the same person for both villains as a model and he thought that was not good. It never bothered me, and I've read the book 5 or 6, if not 7 or 8 times, I just don't think that was a problem. Do you know the French writer Georges Perec?
Yes, of course, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
I figured he was a great fan of Sturgeon's. He has a few things about Sturgeon that I think are wonderful.
I was wondering if you could talk a bit also how, at some point you started to work with also a university publisher the Wesleyan University Press for the Neverian series.
Yeah, Wesleyan is a very good university press. I always used to read their books because I liked reading poetry, and they were very good about poetry. And so the next thing I knew, they wanted to bring back Return to Neverian into print, and so that's the whole series: Tales of Neverian, Neveriona, Flight from Neverian, and yes, there you go, and Return to Neverian.
But was it the case that Flight from Neverian had been that Bantam had refused Flight from Neverian because of the plagues of carnivals? I thought I had read somewhere something like this.
At one point, yes, they didn't know what to do with it. Because, again, for many years, science fiction was considered basically children's literature. And so if you had a novel that was talking about AIDS and things like that, the kids who read it were all quite gung-ho about it because it was treating them as though they were older, and most young people are rather appreciative of that. But at the same time, they didn't want the people didn't want parents learning that that's what they were getting, that was being sold. So so it was kind of a mixed up. It was a very mixed up period. That's the best way to say it. Yeah, I mean, one of my most recent. So this is a book that was this book. I don't know whether simply because it's so large. It's larger than Dahlgren. It's Through the Valley of the Nest of Spiders, and I'm rather fond of it. But again, it was done by a very small company when it first came out, which was I think 2012. The company itself wasn't able to afford to put out a lot of copies. So the result is that it didn't have a lot of copies, and so I, after 5 years, I got the rights back, and so I did my own version of it, which the only way you can get it is to get it off of my website, if you are interested in it, and some people are and some people aren't. So, but you can't, it's so far in the century. So, what do? But if there are no copies around to be sold, you're kind of up, as we used to say, up Schitt's Creek.
So you become like self-publishing yourself. You became a publisher yourself.
Yeah. If you go to my website, you can find copies of it, my self-published copy.
Benjamin, est-ce que tu veux...
Hi, Chip. Can you hear us? Yeah.
I can.
How's the video?
Benjamin, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. And if you can hear us as well.
Fine.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So thanks for being with us tonight. So tonight we are at the LUMA Foundation in Arles with quite a large audience who just watched the edits of the conversation we had a few days ago. But I was thinking that maybe first some people in the audience would have questions for you to start with.
Yeah, I'm open to anything that you want to ask me. I will give it a try.
On peut traduire les questions, bien sûr, par ailleurs. Je tiens à le dire pour l'audience. Des questions?
Well, I mean, if no one has a question, I can start with actually asking you about your latest publication, which is on your website, which, if I'm not wrong, the title is "The Tale of the Two Ophelias." Is that it?
What is the book again? Do you want to?
Your latest publication, "The Tale of the Two Ophelias," that is on your website. I was wondering if you could tell a bit how.
Tale of Two what?
Ophelias, isn't it the title? Your latest publication from your website.
My latest publication. I'm not sure which one you're talking about. You'll have to.
The Tragedy of Ophelia. Tragedy of Ophelia.
Yes. Okay.
Excuse me. It's me.
The Tragedy of Ophelia is. Yeah. Earlier you showed an early novel of mine called of which only a fragment exists, called Voyage Orestes. The Tragedy of Ophelia is two essays, one about Hamlet, which was a section of that novel, or which is based on a section of that novel. It's not the actual text, it's my attempt to reconstruct the actual text. And then there is another smaller essay on Othello, also in that collection. It's a collection of everything I have, of the two pieces I wrote on Shakespeare. That's what that is, in case if someone is interested in it. So the Tragedy of Ophelia is basically, one is, as I said, it's a section of Voyage Orestes, and then also includes another essay on Othello that I thought might be interesting to some people. That one was published before, a long time ago.
Yes, indeed. We showed in the video that publication which is only a fragment of Voyage Orestes, which is a book that you lost. All the manuscript all the tapestry of the novel were lost as
yes, except there was a third. We used to make copies with carbon paper. So when you actually typed it, you basically had a top copy and 3 copies, and one of the carbon copies of the first 4 or 5 chapters survived. And so because that survived, I was able to, using that as the basis, I could publish some of the novel, not all of it, unfortunately. So that's really all that there is to say about that. That's what those two. It's 2 essays, as I said, one on Hamlet and one on Ophelia. One on Hamlet, which is about Ophelia, and one on Othello.
Indeed, like today, you also like you have like this work as a writers, writing about the work of other writers to.
Yes, I've always done that. I've always had a penchant for criticism. I've always liked writing essays about other writers, and I've often been asked to write. Essays about other writers, and when I have, I have a number of books, of a collection. If you go to the website, you can see pretty much all of the essays are also in print. And if you go to my website, you can see there was a set of early books, some of which focused on science fiction, because that's what I was publishing. That's what people wanted me to write about. So when I was asked to write about them, I did. There's a book called Longer Views, another book called Shorter Views. The first one was called Silent Interviews, because I liked writing about them. People wanted to interview me all the time, and I don't think I'm very articulate as an interviewee. I would much prefer to spend some time thinking about what it is I wanted to say, and so that I could say it well and succinctly. But anyway, that's what happened, and so I now have. I don't know. I think there are about 10. There's at least 8 books of interviews.
There's also a book called On Writing, on which you talk about your own approach to writing, which is also connected to your work and experience as like a teacher in creative class in several universities in the United States. And I was wondering if you would like maybe talk a little bit about that part of your work as like a teacher in writing.
Well, again, a number of times, the position I found myself in as a professor after '86, when I joined the academy. I was invited to join the academy at the University of Massachusetts, so I wrote. They also, people wanted me to write about creative writing. And so, and if I had some notion, I would put it down, of course, and so I have and so that's how I started writing things on creative writing. And I then eventually, I think it was back in 2006, I collected them all into one book called On Writing, I don't, what can I say? If you again, you can go.
I was curious about the fact that it seemed that you had like kind of, I'm curious about your approach to also teaching, to the extent that you mentioned recently on social networks that at some point you taught a seminar called Polymath with Long White Birds about like Leonardo da Vinci and Freud. So I was wondering.
Now, what again? I don't even remember that title. What was the
no,
title?
polymath with white birds. Is that true that you taught such a seminar?
That's somewhat. That sounds like a translation of something that I just don't recognize. Translated from someplace else to French and then back again, and I just don't recognize the original piece. Or maybe I then have simply forgotten it. Maybe it was a small piece.
I think we have a question from Nalo, and hopefully this one will be translated smoothly and beautifully and without betrayal.
Hi, Chip. It's Nalo Hopkinson. And it's lovely to see your face. I'm very well. You talked just now about recreating books that had been lost from memory, and my writer's heart is hurting. What was that process like? Did it hurt you?
Well, yes. When I lost Voyage Orestes, I had worked on it for 5 years, and one of the things that happened, it went around to various and sundry places, and some editors liked it, and some editors didn't. But no publisher was willing to take a chance on it. Well, eventually, after a couple of years, I got a phone call. I happened to be home when it came through, and it was a young editor who had just been promoted in his publishing company. I don't even remember which publishing company it was, but he was one of the people who had read it at another publishing company when he was younger, and he always remembered the manuscript and thought, this is something it should have been published. He was one of the people at his place who published it, and he said, well, now I'm now in another position where I have a good deal more clout in publishing company I am now. Could you please send me that manuscript, and I'd like to consider it again, and we will probably publish it. It was a smaller place, and I had to tell him, no, the manuscript has been lost. Most of the manuscript, because the house that I lived in, it was an apartment house, and the apartment house was demolished. The superintendent, a wonderful lady named Mrs. Jureba. Mrs. Jureba had put had taken whom she knew, and she knew I wrote, and so she had taken the manuscript down to the basement, but the whole thing had been demolished. So I don't know whether the manuscript itself got dumped in the Jersey flats, whether it was dumped for garbage in the river, or whether it's underneath, underneath 5 or 6 tons of concrete at the address of the old house. I just don't know. And whatever it is, I think, physically it's gone for good. And was I sad? Yes, I cried.
I understand that. Thank you.
Good, nice to see you there, Nala.
Hi, Chip. Isaiah Lavender here. I just was wondering if you had any further thoughts on Afrofuturism since we published The Mirror of Afrofuturism and Extrapolation.
Okay. Afrofuturism came along, I don't even remember how old I was when it came along. I mean, it was like, I was like 35, pushing 40, before anybody thought of the term Afrofuturism. And for me, it always seemed, the young man who came up with the idea, I say young man, he's a few years younger than I was, his name is Frank Gehry, was a white critic, not a black, although he was interested in black writing. He was very, when he first used the term, basically what he was referring to was any writing about black people in the future. That's all. It had nothing to do with Bill Gibson, as far as he was concerned, who was a very interesting young writer who had once been a student of mine, indeed, as Nalo was at one point, was one of his Afrofuturists, because in one of his stories he talked about some Jamaicans who were living in at this point. I don't even remember where they were living. They were living on one side of a bridge or another, where that was. It was, and it seemed to me to be a kind of what would you say? A kind of it was a marketing carrot. It was, I mean, he was very unclear on what it meant. I mean, there were other writers like myself and Octavia Butler, who were also considered Afrofuturists, but it was anybody, and I kind of liked that because it did not mean writing by Black writers. That was not what Afrofuturism was. It could be, it was, at least as he particularly used it. So, for instance, I wrote something. I was asked to give a talk about Afrofuturism somewhere, and so I wrote about Theodore Sturgeon's use of Black characters in his novel More Than Human, of which there are three, I think. There are the two girls, Beanie and Bonnie, and then there is the Black maid in the house that they go to live in, who when the children insist on being together, changes her attitude toward them, and that's very interesting and actually rather moving, because the children have been told that they must always stay together. No matter what happens, they must stay together. And the woman that they could end up living with says, well, yes, but we don't have little colored sisters, I believe is the line. We don't have little colored girls for sisters. And Jerry says, well, we do. And they want to eat together. That's what they do. And so finally, Miss Q says, well, they all can eat in the kitchen with the maid, and she'll have her breakfast. She's not going to eat with Black children, and it's things like that, and they end up in the book More Than Human, which is basically three meaty novellas. They end up they have to kill Mrs. Q for some reason, and the question is, why did they have the problem of that particular section of the book is why did Miss Q have to die? And the book is generally considered one of the great it was published in 1953, and it's pretty advanced in its thinking in general. It's not, and so I always give that as my example of Afrofuturism. And everyone is quite.
I think we're going to take one last question.
Okay.
Michael, si tu veux.
Hello, Chip. My question will be in French because my English is terrible.
I'll translate.
Quel regard vous portez sur la science-fiction aujourd'hui et sur l'avenir de cette science-fiction?
So I'm really happy because that's a very simple question. Which kind of look do you have upon science fiction, and what could you say about the future of science fiction in general, right? I think that would be.
What was the first part of the question?
Which kind of, quel regard vous avez, which kind of, how do you see science fiction today, and which kind of future do you see upon it?
That you've asked me a question. To end on that question that I cannot answer. I don't do that much reading, and I don't read any science fiction today. As I said, science. There are some people, and there were all, and more power to them, who literally that's all they want to read. They only want to read science fiction, and they're not interested in reading anything else. If someone said, "Hey, this isn't interesting," sometimes I would pick it up, and I was about that way with science fiction. And I was, all those books behind you, you see on my bookshelves,
are a proof that you read a lot. Are a proof that you read a lot still.
Yeah, but they're not. That's a very small. I used to have a very large library, and this is a very small percentage of a library that was about 10 times the size of this, and filled up all the walls and all the walls along a hall, and in all the walls of 8 rooms of an 8-room apartment. I now live in a 3-room apartment, and my books are on 1, 2, 3 walls, so they're not many. But I have not read a science fiction novel in, I don't know. I can't tell you. I probably 5 or 6 years. A couple I've picked up, and I must admit they don't grab me. People send them to me all the time, and because they I find it hard to throw out books, but they are not the books. I don't. And I have been known to take a pile of books and take them down. I live on the 3rd floor of an apartment building that has a commons room for the rest of the building and a little library downstairs. And every once in a while, I take down a small box of books and leave them in the building library so that if anybody else wants to read them, they can. But they're not the books I read. Okay. What I am usually doing is catching up with something that I heard about, and I wanted to give it a read. I just only yesterday, and I'm planning to read it soon. I've always liked plays, and I've always liked the theater. And here's a book called Tomorrow, which is the text of a play by John Krizanc. And it was an experimental play, which is one of the reasons I was so fond of it. And it was a play where you went. It was held at the Armory in New York on the East Side, and it was a book about Italy during the I think it was took place in 1927 in Italy, and you're at the Gabriele D'Annunzio's villa about 50 miles outside of Rome, and you're waiting you're waiting with the whole household, which includes servants, all of whom have their stories, and some of them are spies for Mussolini, and some of them are not, and some of them are trying to protect other people, and D'Annunzio is at the center of it, and he is waiting for a Polish painter named Tamara de Lempicka, I think. I don't know how to pronounce her name, really. I don't remember. And now I saw this play in 1985, and it stayed with me ever since. And only recently did I discover that the actual text of the play had been published, which is why I have it here. And I'm hoping to read it at some particular point. That strikes me as much more interesting than most science fiction that I read. It's it's a play, but it's historical fiction, but it's rather well done. And and my favorite writer, I mentioned Theodore Sturgeon. Another favorite writer is Guy Davenport, who I think is probably the most underrated writer in the United States at this particular point, because he did nothing to promote himself, and but he's only written 66 short stories, and then a number of brilliant essays, brilliant critical essays.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Imagination and what have you. These are great. These are wonderful books, and these are the books I want to tell people about and get them to read them. And as I said, because Davenport did not he was also an indefatigable letter writer, and we actually had a correspondence where I finally wrote him, and we exchanged 6 letters. That's all. But I think, as far as I'm concerned, he and I can't remember when he died. He died in toward the end of the 20th century from lung cancer, and he was 73. Which is to say, I am 11 years older than he ever lived to be. But these are the people that I want to push on you today. And indeed, if you get a chance, you should certainly read Davenport and any other titles you can make out on the shelves behind you.
Thank you, Chip. Really nice to end with Guy Davenport. There's some books of his, collection of novellas that are available in French as well. So hopefully.
Ah, good. Yes. I wonder. He's such a precise stylist.
Yeah, there's a small text on.
I wonder how they translate.
Yeah. Also, a small text on Balthus has been published recently. So pretty amazing. So we're going to stop now, I think, Chip. Thanks a lot again for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful. So a big round of applause.
Thank you.
And my thanks to all of you as well.